we know, but I think it's worth our trying to remember that the Middle Ages were religious, profoundly religious in a way that we can't really conceive nowadays. I want you now to imagine, if you can, that you are inside that church, which you see as a model, and into which this altarpiece was once placed. So no big windows, obviously no electric light, but a space like this with very narrow windows. The light would be filtering in. You're not in the National Gallery, you're inside that church. Low light, maybe the sound of chanting, maybe the sound of prayers being spoken slowly, the smell of incense used to carry up the prayers of the faithful to the heavenly realm. And if you will now just imagine that you are looking at this painting by the light of candles, candles which flicker, candles which would shine against the gold. And you might think, because remember, you can't read, you can't write, the year is 1377, your houses are too hot in summer, too cold in winter, death is part of the threnody of everyday life, people are dying all the time. You might think to yourself, if I'm good, I can perhaps get up to the kingdom everlasting, where all is good, great and golden. And I think another thing might also happen. By the flickering candlelight, you might think that these figures were moving. If they were moving, they were real and could hear your prayer and intercede for you with Christ and the Virgin in heaven. So the painting would be acting as a sacramental channel from earth to heaven. And in a sense, that's how this painting worked. I don't mean to make this sound as crude, perhaps, as I am, but if you will, for a moment, just imagine that I brought from my pocket a picture of a sweet, grey, fluffy kitten, and I pinned it here, and I said, here are the darts, aim for the eyes of the grey, fluffy kitten. It's just a bit of paper, but in some way you feel that you might, in a peculiar way you can't quite explain, be hurting some fluffy kitten somehow, somewhere. So I'm not suggesting to you that in the year 1377 or any time onwards, people felt, oh, they're moving, they're real, they can hear me. But with the same kind of grey, fluffy kitten analogy, I am suggesting to you that there is a very strong attachment between a representation and the thing itself. So we're now in the National Gallery, having a look quite quietly, thinking about aesthetics and gold and colours made from ground pigment. But what we must remember is how this was originally intended to be seen.
So I've tried to sort of pull together my first thoughts. And I don't mean this to be a criticism.
I'm quite keen on criticism.
I was just trying to be very open here. I think what comes out of it is that as an organisation, and I suppose that's probably a bit why I'm here, our public voice is quite weakly represented when we have forums together and we're talking about things. And I kind of tried to chunk that up this morning of how does that manifest itself. One is that just quite simply, I still find it quite amazing that we don't kind of really talk much about the public and the visitors. But actually, I don't think that when it comes to a lot of what we talk about in some of our meetings that actually are talking about communications out to the public, we're not necessarily focusing on those 5.2 million people and their needs as much as I think we could be and should be. It would be good to think that we could foster a culture where we focus a little bit more on, you know, what are our public needs and how are we meeting them. And I was thinking, I did my next little diagram, this was all 3 o'clock in the morning, rights of consciousness sort of stuff. I was thinking, if we are, you know, at the National Gallery, and we were talking about, you know, old masters at our heart, and we are a number of things, we're conservation, research, preservation, heritage, all around the collection and education of it. We are also a visitor attraction, and I know that word's horrid, but we are also that. And if our mission is to make our old masters more central to modern cultural life, then I think there needs to be more of that dialogue around the audience as the centre as well. Still having art at the centre, but it's like another bubble that comes off where we're looking at those audience needs, and the conversations will talk about, you know, how are people reacting to us emotionally, in terms of their pleasure, in terms of intellectualism, in terms of the academic side, in terms of self-development spiritually. And those kind of conversations can then help inform the sort of decision-making that we're doing in meetings like that Titian meeting yesterday. Now, I thought that meeting yesterday was fantastic, and I think the outcome was absolutely right. But I think going forward, it would be good if we could have more conversation about the audience that are going to, what their needs are and what our communications need to reflect going forward, alongside, you know, what we want to say about the art. We also need to be thinking the end person that's going to see our communications. Yeah. What are their needs? And I found some of the meetings that we have, particularly the sort of, you know, very large meetings where perhaps a curator is standing up and talking about a subject is fantastic, but there needs to be the other dialogue that goes on that then carries it on, so we're not just seeing it from what's our perspective, but what's the perspective of the people that are actually going to see what we're trying to show them, as it were, through our exhibitions and marketing and stuff. So my hope, and this is, you know, if there's this opportunity to talk about one's vision going forward with the trustees in June, my hope is that we could make that dialogue more central to what we're doing at exec and in some of our exhibition meetings. And on my side, I'm trying to imbue, you know, the marketing and PR side with more of that stepping back and actually looking at things from the audience point of view. So it's a question of balance. I'm trying to get perhaps a more balanced view where our process enable us to look at the end users' needs, sort of thing, alongside the curatorial needs.
I understand all this. I'd like to have some examples of where you felt we'd failed, or because we hadn't done this.
A lot of what we do is absolutely beautiful in terms of exhibitions, lovely when it comes to the marketing, with beautiful imagery, absolutely gorgeous high quality. But I think because we're sometimes not going through that process of thinking of it from the audience perspective, is we sometimes don't do that, what's crudely called in marketing a sort of call to action. We don't say this is the reason why you must come and see it. Now, with something like Leonardo, it does it itself. It just does it itself, because everybody wants to come and see it.
And you could argue we should have done less.
But no. So Leo isn't a good example. You just got to put up that beautiful picture and everybody wants to come and see it. But other things, we need to actually make them come alive in a different way, because people don't get it immediately. They don't understand, you know, what we offer. And it's part of that conversation we had a few days ago about what's the National Gallery represent. When you look at the research that we've done recently, people love the National Gallery when they get here and they understand it. But to the average sort of person on the street, as it were, they don't quite understand what we are, what we've got, the fact that we've got these amazing paintings. They don't kind of get it, because we're quite discreet in how we tell them that.
You know, I do have some prejudices to overcome. What I don't want is to end up with the gallery producing things to the kind of lowest common denominator of public taste. But I don't even want the kind of average. I mean, I'd rather have spectacular success followed by really interesting failure than have kind of average, you know. No. In fact, I'm quite in favour of those things going up and down. OK, thanks.
I'm going to try something a little bit new today, which is because the painting is sort of rather more abstract than most of the ones we talk about. So we're going to have a bit of a go with some touch drawings. I sort of made a very sort of simple sketch of the main structures of the picture and then put it through this very exciting machine that heats it up and then it all goes furry. I don't know whether it's going to work for you, but I just thought it was worth a try and that it might help some people get the overall structure of the picture, which is not a narrative painting or a painting with great detail. So the sort of abstract shapes within it are quite useful to sort of get a sense of. And then we'll move on to a normal reproduction as well.
I'll pass those around. Raised image here. Professor Whitestick, I'll be back in a minute. Raised image here.
So today we're talking about Camille Pissarro's Boulevard Montmartre at night. It was made in 1897, so just over 100 years ago. Certainly the viewpoint he takes, which is a viewpoint from a hotel window, high above, an aerial viewpoint of these streets, adds to this sense of someone who's a little bit distant, whereas his colleagues would have a viewpoint like that, but include somehow a sense of themselves, even if it was just a bit of balcony or whatever. He used to get no sense of the window frame, no sense of his presence, and the whole thing is viewed, you know, at a distance. And the particular painting we're looking at, though it was one of a whole series of 14 of the Boulevard Montmartre, he went for these big campaigns, painting a lot of pictures at once, trying to capture the changing light effect, so he might have several paintings on the go. But this is an exceptional one, because it's the only nighttime one. His work's always a little bit dappled, you might say, and full of little brushstrokes, but in this one, nothing is very clear because it's dark and it's been raining, and all the sort of things that can be seen are sort of merged together in this great sort of watery pool of colour, light and shape. What we're thinking about is the general structure of the picture, and we're thinking about it a bit like a flag. So you're seeing an aerial view of a street scene. At the front of the picture is an upside-down V going in towards the middle. So it's a flag divided into 4 triangles. The bottom upside-down V triangle is the street. So it's basically a great whoosh of space leading towards a point where all the triangles converge, which is exactly halfway down the picture. And then the right-hand side is a V with its apex meeting the disappearing point, and then the left-hand side is a triangle on its left-hand side, and then the top is a real V, and that, of course, represents the sky. Take both your hands and put them sort of at the top of the picture, and then come down a bit. If you go from the top corners and then down a little bit, and then you move your hands inwards and downwards, following the diagonals. Can you feel the tops of the buildings? So I've only put the main sort of forms in, and above that is an empty space, which is a beautiful, deep, soft, smoky, dark, bluey mauve that dominates the painting. So that's the sky. Take that line of the tops of the buildings and go to where the 2 lines meet. Do you see that they meet at a sort of bubble where the lines converge? Yes? So that's the sort of disappearing point, and he punctuates that with a tiny little dot of light. So overall, it's a really dark picture. It's almost like a sort of semi-transparent curtain's been drawn over the whole scene, and it's very much nighttime, and yet it's punctuated all over the place by these flares of light, and they sort of emphasize the structure and give a sense of excitement of this sort of city scene, which is a great characteristic of this picture. So not surprisingly, the furthest light of a great line of street lights, the furthest light is at the point where all these triangles converge. It's almost like a sort of great symphony to light in darkness there. And there are all these people out there on the street. I've read people sort of trying to make something of this being something to do with his anarchism as well. Certainly in the paintings where you can see more clearly the daylight pictures, he does ensure that he defines the different people and their different social class. So you see people with top hats, you see people who are selling things, you know, you see all sorts. In this picture you don't get that because it's also ill-defined. But he is unlike many of his colleagues in that he does show all strata of society.
Looking around you, always look around. Be careful, guys. Let's go nice and slowly. Don't run. I don't want you to fall over. doesn't have a magic carpet next to it, but it is the painting. Please, have a seat. So this is the story of Moses. It's a story about how a little baby boy is sent down the river and then picked up again, given to the princess, who gives it back to the mother, and he grows up to be an amazing and fantastic person. Now, if you like the story of Moses, you might like to see more stories about Moses. And there are lots of other stories about Moses in the National Gallery. But if you think to yourself, you know, I've had up to here with Moses, I'm sick of Moses, I want to see somebody else, there's lots of other stories that you might want to learn about in the National Gallery. There are people writing. There are people eating and being surprised. There are people, you might not believe this, there's an old man over there who's being fed by ravens. There's a raven, little black bird, that's giving him his food. All these amazing stories in National Gallery paintings for you to see.
This is a portrait which was commissioned by Henry to fulfill another one of his demands, really, to, as I say, to sort of almost meet Christina by proxy through the medium of the portrait so that he could decide whether he wanted to marry her. So Holbein is dispatched to Brussels in March 1538. This is following the death of Henry VIII's third wife, Jane Seymour, and Henry is sort of desperately trying to identify a suitable fourth wife. Holbein arrives, Hans Holbein, sent by the King of England to paint a portrait on the understanding that if it satisfies the king, she's then going to go over to London and become the Queen of England. Henry is said to have fallen in love with it and to have been very, very keen to arrange the marriage. But that doesn't happen. There's an anecdotal statement, we don't know whether this is true, that Christina herself said to the English envoy, if I had two heads, one should be at the disposal of the King of England. So it seems that she herself had a sense that this wouldn't necessarily be a good match for her. And ultimately, Henry gave up. This is a very sort of simple picture in its composition. The sort of frontal pose is very deliberate here so that Henry could actually sort of see exactly what she looked like. No sort of profile view that's hiding any blemishes or imperfections. But the use of light across the features, again, is very, very subtle and carefully modulated so that there's a hint of an expression, there's a hint of animation in her features. She seems to be ever so subtly, sort of wryly observing the artist as she observes him. And I always feel, looking at this painting, this portrait, that this really is a young woman fully in possession of her faculties, very intelligent, squarely facing the world and ready for anything that the world might throw at her. So I'll stop there and say thank you very much and goodbye.
How did Leonardo da Vinci start off with a blank panel and a palette of oil paints and create a painting of such sublime beauty? If you just look at that flower in the corner there, how did that happen? It's this wonderful mixture of observation and imagination. What was Velasquez's intention on painting Venus with her back to us, but with that bewitching look in the mirror? And how did Stubbs achieve such an anatomically accurate representation of a horse? This painting is huge, so physically there must have been great challenges in painting it. But artistically, look at the detail, look at the observation that the artist was able to represent. And what was in Van Gogh's mind when he painted this glorious vase of sunflowers with its brilliant use of colour to convey mood? Just look at the number of colours that are in this painting. It's really yellow and green, but with this amazing blue stripe through it and a blue frame to the vase. And how does that use of blue, juxtaposed against that great splurge of yellow, represent something in the artist's mind? All of it really is about looking and about reflecting and about learning ways to decode paintings and understand what the artist's intention was. And however you look at a painting, whether it's through a very art historical perspective, or whether it's through looking at its history and how it came to be at the gallery, or whether it's through looking at colour or form or composition, this gallery provides you with wonderful opportunities to explore the human condition. And we hope with Take One Picture that it's not just about knowledge and learning. That's one half of it. The other half of it is finding your own creative response to the paintings, finding ways in which these paintings have a relevance to you today. And I think many of you will go back into your schools and find a whole myriad of ways to give your pupils the chance to do this very same exploration.
No, it's nice to see it up here. I think that you should make a proposal. That it be cleaned.
Oh.
Yeah.
But well, that's
just state that it would benefit from a good cleaning and restoration. I'm bothered by all the retouching up here. I'm bothered by all the retouching, evident retouching in the mantle of the Madonna, of the blue.
Yeah,
but which is not nearly so. But I do see that, and also. Is this retouching, or is it crazed varnish?
Crazed varnish.
That's just crazed
Similarly
varnish.
here around her mouth.
Yeah.
Actually, look, that's ground, that sort of honey color. He's dragged the lighter color across the shadow, and then there's a little orangey bit in there. That's ground.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not retouching.
No.
This is a story of Samson and Delilah, Old Testament story in which we are told how the Philistines want to bring down the power of the Israelites, and in particular to break Samson. So they're going to advance their secret weapon, Delilah, and have her seduce Samson so that they can destroy the Israelites. So in a sense, you've got a spy story. You've got the beautiful spy going off to sleep with the enemy. And in the biblical account, we're told how time after time she goes to his campaign tent all decked up and looking gorgeous, trying to find out where his strength lies. Time after time after time, he lies, but his desire for her becomes so great that bit by bit, visit after visit, he finally tells her. I want all of you to imagine that you are a spy and that you have been sent by your people, your tribe, your nation, to be very nice and get secrets out of the enemy. So first of all, the enemy is the enemy. But after you've had a drink or two, a meal, chat with the enemy, and pretended to love the enemy, you are beginning to feel differently towards the enemy. And what has been pretended might become real. It messes with your mind. And I think Rubens, who's this painter of great psychological import, has realised what's going on in the mind of Delilah. She has pretended to, and perhaps eventually come to feel, love. And she has finally slept with Samson. He has fallen asleep. This can happen. And she knows that this consummation of his desire is going to lead directly to his death. The Philistines are emerging through the open door there, flames shining, reflecting on their armour. We've got this kind of hermetic sealant of curtain, purple, rich purple curtain hanging, the rich scarlet of her dress, the gold of her cloak, making this hot and rich. Various light sources are adding to this, plus the covert haircut. The candle is being held by this old woman, and very carefully the barber is making his first incision. We're not looking at a Delilah triumphant. She's not going, yes, gotcha, is she? She's looking ambiguous. She is bending tenderly over him with perhaps a look of dismay. I'm not going to tell you what you think she's feeling. We'll all read it differently. But her body is leaning away. On the one hand, literally on the left hand, there's a tender gesture of hand on back, but the other hand is away from him. It really is on the one hand and on the other. She has, over the time that she has been trying to seduce Samson, as any human being would, gone through a series of mental transformations. It must be very distressing now to realise that the man that she has just had these relations with is now going to die directly as a consequence of her actions. She has, and I'm hesitating to use this word, she has betrayed him. But then she must think to herself, but no, I was working for my country. To have done otherwise would have been to betray my country. It's about betrayal, it's about notions of one's tribe or people, and about what perhaps might be happening in the mind of anyone put into this kind of position. But imagine, if you will, now going into the house of the Burgermeister and seeing this above his fireplace. And there you would be with the Burgermeister with a rather large painting behind you of Delilah with her breasts uncovered. What would you say?
You have to view paintings or narrative paintings as early films and as forms of entertainment. So the artist has to decide at what point of the story is he or she going to focus on. So again, when you come to your work, when you've had all your different ideas, you have to sift through which moment, what point, what's the climax, what to you is the most important thing that can you communicate, and how can you interpret that form of encounters, experiences or chance meetings the best? Paintings are very, very ambiguous. You can look at them in one way, you can interpret them in another. And as your experiences change, and I know because I come in here every day, paintings change, and how you look at them changes as well.
Well, can we get straight on to proposed sport relief? I don't see that the use of the portico for various purposes is much different from the idea of projecting things onto the front of the gallery, which we've always resolutely objected to on the grounds that it's a tremendous opportunity for us if we're doing something for the gallery. I mean, there are various ways of looking at it, but I think the right decision was that we should not have people projecting things using our facade as a billboard, if you like, because it diminishes the impact of any occasion where we wish to do it. But it also just looks as if we're up for sale, frankly. I mean, I know there's an alternative way of looking at it, which is that everyone, gains publicity for the gallery, but does it actually get the right type of publicity, right type of recognition? I mean, this is the interesting question. I'm inclined to say no, because obviously a very worthy charity, but is it more worthy than 100 other charities?
One of the things that we need to balance it again is the profile aspect of it, is that it's an opportunity for us potentially to take a little bit more involvement in You Like, and something that has the potential to be broadcast to 18 million viewers. And I think that's the balance, isn't it? Are we either happy not to align ourselves with these chosen charities, or do we think it's going to happen anyway? Should we perhaps try and take a bit more ownership of it?
So what's going to happen anyway?
Well, the event is going to happen anyway.
We weren't consulted about whether we wanted something to obstruct the access to the National Gallery. We would never have said we want a marathon to end in front of the National Gallery, because a marathon, at the end of a marathon, involves people on either side, so you can't get into the National Gallery. So someone else has made the decision, we're a great place for the end of a marathon. And now we're told it's going to happen anyway. Well, I want to be involved in the decision as to whether the National Gallery is the right place for ending a marathon. And I'm not. Instead, someone else is making that decision. We're going to end a marathon in front of the National Gallery, and then we're being told, well, since it's going to happen anyway, no one's going to be able to get into the National Gallery, can we in fact have a marvellous photo opportunity to show that in fact the National Gallery is all about sports relief? Now, that's my... I mean, and also you say, chosen charities, but who's going to choose them? I mean, it's going to be I do have a hell of a lot of requests for, the use of the National Gallery for charitable purposes. I mean, one problem with this, of course, is also that, the whole question of a charity, which we are, using its facilities and everything for another charity, which trustees have been very concerned about, and it's always a worry of ours that, when people have asked if they can have charitable events within the National Gallery, and we've always...
We don't do that, but we appear in the backdrop with our banners, like it or not. And that's just part of the London, that's part of that landmark. So this race, I imagine, will end in Trafalgar Square. And you can imagine the footage, the filming of an individual running up towards Trafalgar Square to the North Terrace. We'll be in the backdrop.
I just feel that the National Gallery closes the whole end of this square, and all these events are going on, and all these things are being planned without us being properly involved. And all we say is at the last minute, well, it's going to happen anyway, so can we just use it? Jill, you're in charge of communication.
Yeah, and I think we should use this, and Greg and I go back to Westminster and just use this as an example of things that they have to talk to us about, and so that we're much more joined up with them, because we need more notice on this, so I think we should pick that up as an action point, if you support that.
I totally do.
Yeah, and that'll be a good example to be able to quote. I supported Julie when we first heard about this, because I thought the exposure is fantastic, and it is very populist. It actually gets us to 18 million people, and it's therefore a good association. And my only concern in this is that obviously it is setting a precedent in terms of charities. So it does, in associating with charities to a degree. And that was the only struggle I've had with it, of how to then actually say no to other organisations, whereas before we can be very cut and dry on it. But outside of that, if we were able to get round that, or felt that we could associate it with it, and it's a one-off, and that we're not going to do this as a habit, I think it actually could be quite doable. I mean, I would have thought that at this relatively early stage, we'd be at a point where if we wanted to do it, we could work with them so we actually make it possible. So it's only a half-hour shot of an interview, and maybe one can keep the portico open by having people directed through a different way. I mean, I think if we believed in it, we could make it happen.
And could you articulate what you think the National Gallery gets out of it?
I think it's I think it's actually, because we do appear rather on our pedestal, physically, literally, it's actually a way to be there and seen to be part of common culture. I mean, Sport Relief has a massive following and is very much for the nation, as it were, and therefore it's associating with something that gives a lot of pleasure to a lot of people, is how I'd sort of rationalise it. But I do accept it is quite difficult in setting precedents with charities, and we do get many, many requests.
I think what they're looking for is either a no or a yes in principle, whereas if the answer is yes in principle, then we can, you and I or whomever, can work to shape that, so that if we think then we need to sort of get more out of it, if you like, we can be doing that, whether that's in terms of profile or actually financially as well.
Okay, what about Chinese New Year? Why shouldn't we be involved in that? I mean, would you say yes to Chinese New Year?
Well, you don't have quite the same rationale in terms of profile, do you?
It's a profile raising thing, whereas it's different from other events that are happening simply because of the breadth of the reach you get.
Well, that's one criterion, would be how many millions are going to be actually watching it.
And I think it would be dangerous to suggest that we're going to be able to get a lot of coverage per se. But on the other hand, if we feel that, as per our corporate objectives, we want to be seen as more approachable in the very positive sense, it is one way of doing it for half an hour once a year. So, and if we said that this is not something... That's an interesting one, Jill. Half an hour every year, that's going to be one of our fences. Well, no, seriously. We might say we will consider one thing a year that supports something that is loved by the nation and compatible and for everyone. I mean, one could rationalise that. And then we'd decide if there wasn't an opportunity on certain years, we wouldn't do it. And we wouldn't do it if it causes a lot of disruption to our public. But if there's something that's not going to, that we can work with Sports Relief to make it minimum disruption to our visitors.
Let's just talk about that for a little bit, the disruption, because we sat around this table and we were all sure that we were going to work with Harry Potter to make it work. What actually happened was that, in fact, the National Gallery was completely blocked. In as much as it wasn't blocked, people were just using the St. Through Wing as a spectator point to look out at the gallery. I think the gallery did probably make the right decision about Harry Potter. It was most unsatisfactory. But in fact, none of the sort of guarantees we were talking about actually could be effectively implemented at the time. We're talking about a certain type of advertising. And when you see football match on television and you see these huge signs, they're all about, running shoes and things. I mean, there's some sort of relationship. They're not about Goya and Picasso even. So it seems to me the more disparity there is between the different types of public, which we for one thing and the other, the more it actually looks as if one's just short of cash. I mean, in other words, or is in desperate need of publicity. I mean, I just don't know. I just don't see how it's seriously going to... The name National Gallery can be announced a lot. But what, in this context, would that do for us? I mean, what does that tell people about what the National Gallery really is? Secondly, you've got to continue with these negotiations anyway.
One
of the highlights of the gallery, a painting that many people come along and see. At some point in 1533, these two men, meeting as they did what we might do were we to meet a fellow countryman in a foreign place. They had their picture taken. Clearly, there's no handing a camera to a passerby or a waiter. The only way, until the advent of photography, to have an image is to have a painter paint you. They had money, they were wealthy, they could pay for the best painter living in England to capture their image. And the top painter, living and working in London in 1533, was the German painter Hans Holbein. And at some point, the three men, Hans Holbein, Jean de Dinteville, Georges de Selve, would have got together and discussed this composition. They're the ones telling the painter what to do, probably Jean de Dinteville having the greatest say, because it was his painting, he paid, it went back to his chateau in Policy. And it could well be that Hans Holbein had no idea of the whole significance of everything he was being asked to make. I have a colleague who thinks this is all about a murder that took place. And I look at it and I see, but where, what? And he says, I'm not telling you, you'll steal my idea and publish it. So none of us knows what it is, but all we have is what we can go on. And there is the loot case, the box, the empty box, which perhaps reminds us of the coffin of death, which is also alluded to here by this distorted skull. It's an example of anamorphosis. You look at it full on, from where you are, it's unreadable, but from where you are, it reads as a skull. And we don't know whose idea it was. Did Holbein say, Your Excellencies, why not have an anamorphic skull? See, I have made one here. And they thought, oh, that's good, yeah, that'll look really good back in the chateau at Policy. Or had one of these two men heard about it and said, Master Holbein, can you fashion for us a cunning perspective? We don't know. But all of you know that to put a skull, which is a symbol of death, into a portrait is a strange and unusual thing, perhaps. Certain symbols, certain objects are multivalent. They carry manifold symbols, but not the skull. The skull is always, is it not, a symbol of death. So perhaps the reading of this might be that death is ever present, hiding, but ever present. You never know when it might occur. And in fact, he didn't make old bones at all. But perhaps carried within this was a message which Jean de Dinteville could talk about when he showed anyone this painting in his house at Policy. Maybe the message was something like this. No matter how rich, young, he was 29 or in his 29th year, he in his 25th year, handsome, interested in and worried about the world you are, in the end it all comes down to the grim invincible, and the only thing to be considered in this world is salvation, represented by the almost hidden crucifix, top left.
The brilliant thing about art, it encompasses everything. It's not just about either drawing or painting, it's about life. It's about music, it's about film, it's about philosophy, it's about mathematics, it's about science, it's about literature. Anything you are interested in goes into art. And that's why I became an artist. And that's what fascinates me. It doesn't matter what you're interested in, it can all feed in. And I want to also talk about how we can use these paintings in the collection. Because it might seem to you, hang on a minute, we're looking at 17th century, 16th century, 19th century. What on earth use is that for us today in the 21st century? Now, I don't make paintings. I do a lot of drawing, but I make installations. So I make things that take over a room that people can interact with. And yet these paintings here give me a huge amount of inspiration. And I come in here almost every day. So I want them to do that for you. Now, I'm going to be sort of blunt about this because it's important that you know this. The collection is founded on slavery. John Julius Angerstein, who had the nucleus of the collection, worked for Lloyd's, who were insurers against slave boats. And it's very important that people absolutely understand that a lot of the institutions, whether you're talking Tate, whether you're talking British Museum, a lot of these big institutions are founded for money, and it's something, obviously, that should never be forgotten and should always be understood. And also Britain's very, very shameful part in that shouldn't, obviously, be forgotten either.
Let's start first with Stubbs, the great horse painter. You look at this portrait of a horse, and it's hard to imagine that this is painted by someone that didn't really particularly train as an artist. He was largely self-taught. He established a career first as a portrait painter and as an anatomist. He studied anatomy at York Hospital and ended up actually drawing illustrations for a new book on midwifery or midwifery. So he'd already established himself as an artist in one way. But then he set himself down for 18 months in a farmhouse, this was in 1756, and devoted that time, a year and a half, to studying the anatomy of horses. He was close to a tannery, that took the hides off of them, and they gave him the corpses of these horses. And he rigged up in this farmhouse a great iron bar and pulley systems, and he would put planks of wood underneath the horse's legs so that he would suspend them literally from hooks on a ceiling like a piece of meat, and then would start to go about drawing all of the muscles that he could see in the tendons. And then he would scalpel away and lift away another layer of muscles and draw what was underneath until he eventually got to the skeleton, and then he would animate that. He would draw and write notes. So this was big news, what Stubbs was doing.
I'm very bad at maths. I was bad at maths at your age, I'm bad at maths at my age, and I will always be bad at maths, I think. I'd like to change. And the reason why I like art rather than maths, although they are connected somehow, is that in art you can be right in lots of different ways, but in maths you can only really be right once, otherwise you're wrong. I do really like that about art. And one of the reasons why I wanted to show you this painting is to talk about saints and things, but it's also to talk about storytelling, because I think that's really, really important. Think about the way that a painting, whether it's this painting, this is by an artist called Bellini, or it's Diana and Actaeon, or it's Death of Actaeon, which we're going to be seeing, or it's Bacchus and Ariadne, a painting has got to tell its whole story in a single image. A book or a poem has time. The one thing that paintings don't have is time. Do you know what I mean? So a film unfolds over 2 hours. You've got time to introduce characters. You've got time to show the plot going in and out. A book, a huge book, can take you 6 months to read, or longer, can't it? Can do. That means you're living with the story for 6 months. And it goes in and out, it weaves around, new characters are introduced, different things happen. That's got time too. But a painting doesn't have time. A painting has the speed of light to tell you the story. It has the time it takes to see the painting. So telling a story in a painting is incredibly skillful. So I want to think a little bit more, before we move on to Titian, which we will do soon, about how this artist tells the story. What else is in the painting? Can you think of a reason? Because in the actual story, there's no woodcutters. In the story, there's just St. Peter Martyr and his assistant, who you can see there escaping, or walking alongside a wood near Milan in northern Italy when they were set upon by assassins. One assassin killed St. Peter Martyr, and as St. Peter Martyr was dying, he wrote, "I believe," in blood on the ground. Now, he's not doing it in this one, but there's another version of this scene in another gallery in London, a place called the Courtauld Gallery, where he is writing, "I believe," in blood. It's quite gruesome, isn't it? Quite a gruesome story, but quite moving as well. The other guy escapes. No mention of woodcutters. Totally irrelevant. Why do you think he put them in? And they take up so much space. The woodcutters and what they're involved with, in other words, the wood, take up like most of the painting. Why did he do that? Yeah.
Maybe because it gives the painting a little more character.
Definitely gives the painting more character. It totally does. Think about this. A tragic event, perhaps made more tragic if there are people around who don't recognise what's going on, who don't see it as a tragedy. I'm trying to think of an example. I wonder if you might know an example. I don't know, but there's something, it happens a lot in plays by Shakespeare, for example. Like there are people who don't really know what's happening, and they go, "Oh, what's happening over there?" There's a lovely painting, which is not actually in this gallery, but it's a painting of the fall of Icarus. Icarus is the one who made the wings. You know that one, made the wings that way, flew too close to the sun? Fantastic painting where almost all of the painting is people not noticing what's going on, people like ploughing the fields and doing lots of other things, while in the background, he plunks into the ocean and dies. And there's a famous poem about that by Auden, which is a really good poem about how people don't really notice these things happening. I think these woodcutters are partly there to make it even more tragic because they just keep going on and on and on.
It's amazing, isn't it, how it adds a sense of narrative as soon as there's an object. So as soon as we've got this pole, we're suddenly seeing all sorts of paintings in the gallery where there's sort of... So suddenly there might be some sort of story woven into this pose. So we can't help ourselves but add narrative when we're dealing with the human body. And if you want to include any elements from the room, thinking about vertical lines behind or horizontal lines, finding lines of connection. So trying to constantly looking at the relationship between the head and the shoulder girdle, between the shoulder girdle and the pelvis. Be brave and add that vertical line to contrast the curves of the body. Now that we're slowing down and really looking, so start to move more quickly around the body, making marks in sort of continuous movement as you work around it with your eyes. Leave a leg, move back to a shoulder, go up to the top of the head, move very freely around so you get a sense of how this pose is working.
This hand should be big because it's going to hide that forearm.
Yeah, because it's the gap between it, the gap between the nipple and first knuckle of the hand. If you can sort of draw that gap, then you'll be seeing it. So as you move...
That's that line there, right?
That's the line of the crease in her elbow. Yeah. But I'm thinking about the actual bit of air between breast and fist.
Yeah, that space
sort
is in front of that.
Yeah, so they're just trying to sort of measure that space, really, and place the hand so that it's like bookending, isn't it, the space in the middle. That makes sense.
Easier said than done.
Yeah, get that hand in.
I'm not sure I did.
If you're wrestling with it, just draw it a few times on another piece of paper and then come back. Think about how you want to use your pencil. You can work in cross-hatching to build up tone. You can start to smudge chalk if you want to think about light and dark. If you're using the chalks, and you might want to switch, if you've been using the black chalk, maybe explore the red chalk as well, so you get the much softer mark with the red chalk. Black chalk slightly more sort of bound together. See if that changes the way that you draw. Just have another 30 seconds on this drawing. So if you're working your way around the figure, just see if you want to, in very brief strokes, complete this pose.
Does that mean they're all sold?
No, he's just gone to check to see how many they have left.
Taking heart.
Even while the exhibition's been open, have there been insights that you've been getting into the work of Leonardo?
One of the things that you do as you start working on an exhibition is to think about what the whole narrative will be. But you're also cataloguing each work individually, so at a certain point it becomes a mosaic, perhaps, rather than a seamless narrative. And obviously that remains the case to some degree. But at the same time, you are beginning to see these works together. You're beginning to be able to appreciate what makes them very special as a kind of viewing experience. And I suppose what I've been struck by over and over again is this quality within these works whereby the paintings show figures that are are incredibly present, incredibly vital, and yet extraordinarily remote and other, as if they... And that's something that, for me, is very much a unifying factor. So I suppose what I've been doing is seeing the works together, thinking about what makes them a complete oeuvre by a single artist, what makes them Leonardo. And it's really, I suppose, I've been struck over and over again by the quality of thought allied with a kind of pitch of emotion and an intensity of craft. And it's that, really, that seeing the pictures together has made me understand about this extraordinary artist.
And have there been any insights, anything you've learned that's surprised you over, particularly since the work has been gathered here?
What I've been amazed by is how profound and layered and endless the viewing experience is with Leonardo. How you always feel that this is an artist who goes on giving with each of the works. And in fact, one of the ways I think you can distinguish a Leonardo painting from one by a member of his workshop is this process of endless revelation, whereby it's almost as if sort of onion layers are being peeled away, and yet you never ever quite get to the core. Leonardo's capacity to paint the invisible, the just out of reach, is really extraordinary, and that's been the revelation. But it's not about, you know, who painted what or anything of that kind. It's really about the personality of the artist. I think, for what it's worth, that it's this spiritual quality in Leonardo's work that has raised this exhibition to the event it's been, in the sense that it's not just about the name, it's about something to do with the way in which these pictures speak to people across time. Leonardo created a kind of archive of drawings, and they're about invention, and they're about observation, and they're about looking and thinking and so on. And he kept some of those, and they go on being an extraordinary point of reference for each new stage. He's an artist who constantly refines, who revisits certain themes over and over again. And really, as I say, in doing that, each of these works becomes ever more considered, ever more felt as well. And that's the difference between him and his pupils. That's the difference between him and his pupils. It's really in his pupils' work that you just don't see that. You can see motifs being repeated, you can see beautiful craft, but you don't see that exquisiteness of thought.
Okay, great, thanks. Great, thanks very much.
So I've already taken some samples. I took a couple to look at the varnish, because as you can probably see, with a bit of an angle, there's a varnish layer which shows up quite clearly in UV, which doesn't come all the way to the edge.
Okay.
There's a sort of drip of it that's running down here.
It stops there, does it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've taken some to look at the varnish, and then my other samples mainly concentrate on this brown layer, which is the layer that seems to have contracted and pulled and reticulated across the surface. What's interesting, I suppose, from my point of view, is how that layer relates to the paint below and how it sits on the surface, whether it's separated from the paint by anything in between, and if we can see a bit more about the layer in cross-section, whether it's got pigment in it. So those types of things would be very interesting about a sample, so a cross-section sample.
So given this varnish layer goes to the border, I mean, it would be perfectly
we
right
could take... to look
at that border.
Exactly.
We need a place where there's a damage, really. I'm sort of looking up there in a way, because although there's this large loss here, that may not actually have that layer reaching that point, but up there I think it probably does. Do you think
that might be worth looking at? And I think the corners all have damages in where, if in the past, from framing problems, that might be worth looking up there.
But for the complete sequence of layers, probably one's best confined to that part, because, you know, as you say. So really, let's have a little look up at the top.
Get the microscope.
Because there are these damages here. You could probably be quite safe taking something here. As a preliminary, that's the thing we ought to look at, really. I think that should do it, actually. So that's a very tiny bit just from the edge of the sort of inner side of the damage. I don't know if you can even see it, actually. So,
Make it a bit easier for me to do my analysis.
Right, OK, good. Fantastic. Thanks very much. So I could just note down where this comes from, I think. I'll put it on this one. OK, thanks.
Okay.
That's okay?
Yeah, don't worry.
Okay.
Und das ist wirklich die nachgemachte Version.
Ja, ich habe es nach dem Katalog schon.
Ja.
The main challenge that we're dealing with is that our income and what's available to us to spend is 3.2 million less next year than it was this year. So it's a significant reduction in what we have got available to us to spend. Now, of course, some of the income we had this year was exceptional from Leonardo, and our costs will go down as well next year. So we're spending less on exhibitions than we were this year. We're also spending less on our capital programme next year, so we're 1.5 million down because we're spending 1 million less on the capital and we're spending 500,000 less on exhibitions. Also this year we've been able to afford the compensation payments to a range of staff who have left, which was in the region of 700,000. So all of those costs won't appear again next year, but that still leaves us about 1 million short, and the way that we have managed to break even for next year is because of the savings we've made in staff costs. So that has enabled us to present a balanced budget. So the work that we've done this year on changes to invigilation arrangements and in the posts that have been reduced has enabled us to balance this budget. And there's a little bit more detail about that later on in the paper, which I'll come to. One of the big risks that we face over the coming years is the likelihood of further cuts, which, although I'm hopeful that won't be the case during 2012-13, it's not impossible that there will be another spending review in 2012-13 which will reduce our grant in aid still further in the following 2 years, 13-14 and 14-15, which can be by as much as 5% each year. And that's just what they've told us about. So, and things have worsened considerably since the spending review 18 months ago.
Are we being too cautious on that front? Because it's so, only at 1.7 million of new income, when, the last couple of years they've gone way over that and way over our budget figures. Are we being too careful with that figure?
It's best to be cautious because there are things that we don't know about. For example, I've only budgeted in here for a 1% increase in staff costs on the basis of the autumn statement. Now, we don't know what the payrolls will actually be, and in recent years they've actually been provided flexibility that puts us under pressure to actually pay more. So there are uncertainties over energy costs, which can be very volatile, and there's the possibility of further cuts. So I would prefer to budget cautiously and know that we may well come in a better position, which will provide us with the opportunity to cover such eventualities if we need to.
Last year, or this current year, we budgeted for 2.8 million, and as of December, you were at 4.9 million, not including 1.1 of campaign income, so you were at 6 altogether. And now we're budgeting for 1.7 million. No one's going to really look that closely at this, but it looks like we're spending 53p for every pound we raise. And what we have in our budget, is our budget really realistic then? It's cautious, but is it realistic when we're raising twice what we put in here historically?
This is reflecting what we would expect to bring in. You're right, it's very cautious, but it enables us to balance a budget that has accommodated the costs that we consider to be reasonable to do what we want to do next year, and it provides us with some flexibility to cover eventualities that we can't predict, and also new projects that might come up during the course of the year. So we could include more income, but then we'd be including a much bigger contingency, which I'm not sure is a brilliant message.
Yeah.
Here is the decline of the empire. Here something terrible has occurred. It's the end of Carthage, their overthrow by Rome. The men are all being taken off prisoners to Rome. The women are weeping for them. Here the sun is descending, I think, in the sky. It's a very dramatic sunset with quite a lot of red in it. Turner himself referred to it as an ensanguined sunset, an ensanguined sky. And here, these rough marks of the brush in a dark red. I think if you go into the exhibition, you'll see it is a dark browny red, almost perhaps like encrusted blood. So this is a very dramatic view of empire. So here I think Turner really starts to detach himself from Claude in many ways, because these are not tranquil depictions of classical subjects. These are reflections on history, and Turner was immensely interested in and influenced by history. He also wrote poetry on this subject, and he can't have avoided, of course, the events around the painting of these compositions in 1815 and this one in 1817. It was, of course, the very end of the Napoleonic Wars, the end of the Napoleonic Empire, and by contrast, the rise of the British Empire. But Turner took a very long view of these things. He was interested in the rise and fall of empires over hundreds and thousands of years.
Do come in. So, welcome. Now, you're looking at a picture of Frederick Rihel, painted in 1663. It came into the National Gallery in 1960. It had been quite obscured by lots of accumulated yellow varnishes. The picture was restored not that long ago, but the varnish that was used was very, very degraded. And what you're seeing now is a picture where I've done quite a lot of cleaning, and that means using solvents to reduce or remove discolored varnishes from the paint. Over most of the surface area, there's an area roughly corresponding to here where I haven't cleaned, so not yet. It's a little hard to see the differences, I suppose, now. I can tell you it looked much worse. No, I think the interesting thing about a yellow varnish, everyone understands that a yellow varnish makes, shifts all the colors toward the warmer end of the spectrum. Blue becomes green, and say a yellow film over a yellow color doesn't change it much at all. And so you might wonder about a picture like this, which is mostly warm colors, white, red, brown, yellow, about the distortion. I mean, there are two things I would point out that have changed quite a lot, and you can distinguish some quite important things that are going on in the picture. The differences between the yellow and white impasto is very typical of Rembrandt, was completely impossible to see. I mean, the sleeve and the sash were more or less the same color. But the other thing, I think, an important thing to think about while we clean pictures that people often kind of underestimate is the fact that varnishes not only change color, they often go a little bit foggy. They develop a fine craquelure and they scatter light. And it's really on a microscopic level like looking at a shattered windscreen on a car. There's still a film there, but you can't really see through it. And that really changes the way you see the darker colors. So they become much lighter. And so you can't see the distinctions that are in the painting between, say, quite dark, very dark, and extremely dark. And that's really important with a picture like this, where there's so much going on that's about distinctions between brown and black, and really the illusion of depth and volume and spatial recession is the key gain, I think, from this picture. I think the kind of investigation I was saying before that we do as part of any restoration, even preliminary to any restoration, has shown some other interesting things about this painting. And I'm going to take my one visual aid here. Sorry about that. We normally do X-radiographs of pictures like this before we start restoration. So here is a typical X-ray where you can see the denser pigments, the ones with the heavier atomic weights, show up white. And luckily, it just so happens that lead white, the white pigment, is actually one of the heaviest pigments. So you can see the distribution of some of these things. And it tells you very important information about how a picture is planned. For example, the sky is sort of painted around the head. The head isn't on top of it because you don't see that going through. And you learn all kinds of interesting things that are often very revealing about a particular painter's way of working, certain mannerisms of how he might handle impasto and all the rest. But the fascinating thing about this picture, which many of you may have already worked out, is that if you turn it sideways, there's another picture. And this is very, very unusual for this kind of picture. Rembrandt did this a great deal. Something like a quarter of his self-portraits are recycled and reused. But it's very unusual in the context of an important commission. This is not painting for the marketplace. This picture was for a rather important client. So we can't be absolutely certain about this underlying painting. I think it's fair to say it's the same sort of body type and general characteristics as Frederick Rihel. So you might say that he may have changed it in response to this event that happened, is one theory. This in itself is quite a bold and very unusual composition. There are more or less no full-length portraits after his experiences with the reception of the Night Watch. So that in itself is unusual, and to have this great empty space with what look like trees and the rest coming through is quite fascinating. But for whatever reason, at which we can't be certain, this picture, which is probably not entirely finished but very far along, was changed. And then we get into some interesting things about what happened when it was changed, because he, amazingly enough, just turned it sideways and started again. There's no priming in between the two paintings. There's a brown quartz, sort of sandy ground, very typical of late Rembrandt, underneath the first composition, but he just turned it and started right on the other canvas, as best we can tell. And away he went. And it's interesting to think about that because oil paint becomes more transparent naturally over the centuries, slightly more transparent, and so that's why you can often see pentimenti changes that were not intended to be seen. Everyone thinks about the horse's legs on Velázquez when you see 3 or 4 of them as he's adjusting it and you can see them coming through. And there's a fair bit of that happening in this picture. I know the light's a little low in the evening, but here, for example, is the hat of the standing man, and his face is here. So you can see a little bit of the pink showing through. And there's some odd kind of shapes coming through the horse's belly, and they have to do with the underlying composition. Now we're getting into interesting problems of restoration history, because as I said, what you're seeing now is a picture that's largely cleaned, at least in the first sense of the varnish coming off. So you can see the kind of damages that are very typical of a picture. Actually, this picture's in pretty good state for its size and its age. There's certain losses that who knows what the reasons are. But there are other problems with this picture that I think result from previous restorers' confusion about what was going on. It's important to remember that sort of before the mid-19th century, the kind of materials available to restorers to thin or remove varnishes was fairly limited. They're fairly blunt instruments. You couldn't really have the distillation of organic solvents that you could know their reactions and really predict and understand the chemistry of what was going on. So there was often issues with over-cleaning. And I think what may have happened here is that if you think about Rembrandt and his characteristic accents of very thick impasto that create this wonderful relief, there was a bit of that going on from the underlying composition. And I imagine if you're cleaning brown varnish off a brown painting and you suddenly start to see some very exciting impasto that, the Rembrandt, it is quite exciting. And we can't be absolutely certain, but for example, this ornament on the boot, I think I've asked you about this before, haven't I? That it's unlike any, he's basically wearing a kind of fancy dress hunting outfit, very typical militia kind of party gear with a vaguely martial idea. But and so this boot is along those lines too, and has this odd ornament of a type that I've never seen anywhere else. And if you then refer back to this X-ray, let's see, let's see, where am I? Hello, there we go. So it's this this thing on his boot is actually the top of this kind of, he's wearing a kind of tabard jerkin kind of hunting, riding, even funnily enough, he seems to be in riding gear, the standing figure as well. Maybe it's just sort of country squire look. But that's a detail of his underlying costume. Now, it could be that Rembrandt just fortuitously thought, that's rather good, I'll use that. But it does seem a little odd to me because it's this perfect triangle. It doesn't really curve. And the whole idea about this picture is with a very limited palette, he's created this amazing thing of the horse coming out at a diagonal. Even the boot is twisting out and coming up. And if you think the thing should be probably 1.5 meters higher, it's really coming down, looking down in a way that the kind of, equestrian portraits of this type are supposed to sort of create this kind of grandeur and authority, if not power. Think of the Velázquez Olivares or something like that. So this doesn't seem to square with that to me. But we'll be looking at that very closely. I mean, we'll look with a microscope and take some samples and see. It looks to me like you can see traces of this kind of mouse-colored brown-gray paint within the impasto of the boot ornament, which suggests to me that this is an earlier misguided cleaning. That's something quite different than, say, the natural increase in transparency. There's other evidence of very harsh cleaning in this picture anyway. This kind of broken up islands that look a bit like sort of, I don't know, fractoids or sort of steamy looking thing. That's very typical kind of result of undercutting with harsh solvents or reagents. So this picture has suffered a bit, and I think there was much more confusion in the lower areas where there is sort of brown on brown on brown, and it's a little confusing if you're not really aware of what's happening.